Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're going to be discussing our pre-NFL draft rookie wide receiver rankings. So obviously, things are going to change once we know landing spot and draft capital. But for right now, these grades are based purely off of the model in which we used to grade prospects, and we used all 22 film as much as possible for all these players. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun and a little bit controversial because I think some people have certain opinions on some of these players. Uh, Particularly that some of these guys are a little bit faster, which I think is going to be swayed by what people saw at a combine when there were no pads. And so I think we're going to disagree with some consensus opinion with some of these players, but it's going to be interesting, and we have historical data to back it up.
Yeah, and you'll see the guys that we're talking about that would probably cause some outrage, but our rankings are our rankings, love them or hate them. We got about 26 guys here, so we're gonna do it as a traditional tier list kind of format, right? We're gonna do guys from our F tier first, and then we're gonna go all the way up to our S tier guys. So we're saving the best for last, obviously, and we're going to go with our first receiver, which is the only receiver in our F tier. Poor Ja'Cory Brooks out of Louisville. Uh, he's down there with the worst grades that we've gotten out of this receiving class. He's projected like a seventh round pick, so it's not super surprising, but he's probably one of the slowest receivers I've ever seen on film that when it comes to terms of players that are projected to be drafted, his speed is hilariously bad in my opinion. Route running was very lazy. Uh, there's not much to say on him outside of he's a really solid jump ball receiver. He's pretty solid at the catch point. Had some pretty big time catches for Louisville this past year. Alabama transfer as well. But just, outside of that, I don't see him making it in the NFL at all.
Yeah, I think in a best case scenario, he is no Matt Stafford, Kenny Galladay.
Yeah, yeah, and I kind of compare him to post injury Laquan Treadwell. I know Laquan Treadwell was like a first round pick, super great at Ole Miss before the injury, but he just never was able to do anything. And Laquan, I think, ran like a 4.6. I think Ja'Cory Brooks is even slower than that. So, yeah. All right, moving on to our E tier here. We got Jimmy Horn Jr. out of Colorado.
Yeah, so with Jimmy Horn Jr., his long speed is absolutely fantastic, as well as his burst, his acceleration, in other words. I will say he's an average route runner, though, and he just does not have what it takes at the catch point. He has tons of concentration drops. I mean, a lot of those. And catching traffic, forget it. If he's going to be utilized, it's going to have to be in space.
Yeah, and another thing, he's a relatively small guy as well. I think he's like 175 pounds, 5'9", 5'10", so he's super small. Gonna probably be slot specific at the next level. I know Colorado kind of used him all over the place. So, that is, kind of cool to see, but I don't think he plays anything outside of slot. I mean, you could see him in kind of like a pseudo Xavier Worthy role, but that would be a ceiling if he even makes the team. So up next on our rankings, we have one of the highest upside players in the entire draft, in my opinion, in terms of just height, weight, speed, freak. So Savion Williams, he's one of the highest upside players in the entire draft for us. I mean, 6'4", 6'5", 215, 220 pounds with 4.48 speed. They used him at like running back, a lot of end arounds, things like that. There's a big reason for that because he's not very good at route running. He's definitely probably the biggest project on this entire list. And, his upside, if he hits, is absolutely fantastic, but the likelihood of him cleaning up all of these issues is kind of low. He's probably got up there with Jimmy Horn in terms of some of the worst catching in this entire class. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, they were throwing clean passes to him while he was in open space, and he would just drop them over and over and over and over again. But like I said, he's very good after the catch. He's good. He's got some good elusiveness to him, some good shake to him, but he's got to learn how to catch and run routes. If not, you're just an athlete that can run fast and make people miss, and you're too big to be a running back. So he's going to have to clean up a lot of things in order to make the team. But I could see a team taking a flyer on him in like the 4th round, 5th round ish, just as like a gadget player that could be developed into something more.
Yeah, I will say, in terms of his hands, think of the worst of Quentin Johnston in uncontested situations that are easy balls. But think of somebody like Mike Williams when it comes to the difficult, ridiculous catches that nobody should be catching. It is incredible. I don't know if we will ever see a player like this. Like you said, if he hits, there's a ton of upside, but he needs to work a ton on his route running and just catching in general.
Yep, for sure. Moving on to the next guy, we have Elijah Badger.
Yeah, so with Elijah Badger, he's relatively quick and fast. I will say that he's, I think, a little bit better of an athlete than he is as an actual wide receiver. Um, he did have some concentration drops on film, but I would say overall his catching isn't terrible by any means. Contested catch situations is fine, and he's decent after the catch as well. I would actually comp him to a poor man's Kyle Williams, somebody who we'll talk about later. But like I said, just I think he's a better athlete than technically a wide receiver.
All right, so next up on our list, we have Ricky White out of UNLV. Definitely a fun offense. The go-go offense is something that's taken the country by storm this past season. I mean, there's a lot to like with Ricky White. He's a guy that, this receiving class has got a lot of, mid to, below mid guys in it that, kind of can have high upside. But with Ricky White, I mean, he had some good showings, right? He had particularly his ability in terms of his run after catch ability. We thought he was relatively elusive after the catch. His route running wasn't anything crazy. His speed was solid, but, he's just not, I don't know if he's going to be able to carve out a role on an offense. He's one of these more outside receivers that, I don't think translates very well at the next level in terms of fantasy production. So, yeah, he's just, I didn't see a whole lot with him. But, in terms of vertical X receivers, if you can get that jump ball ability, I mean, you can be like a DK Metcalf type of player. He's just not that athlete, obviously.
Yeah, and I think he had a lot of concentration drops as well. And if you don't have the draft capital and you don't particularly stand out, and you have drop issues, it's probably just not a recipe for success. But I will say his analytics were quite impressive.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Moving on to some people's, he's super high on these guys. If you just look at analytics, you got Nick Nash out of San Jose State. Triple Crown winner at the receiver position this year. What do you think about old Nick Nash?
So I will say with Nick Nash, the biggest issue I have with him is he has the worst burst acceleration off the line of anybody in this class. It's atrocious. Now, everything else in terms of his ball skills, his jumping ability, despite his burst off the line being really slow, his jump ball ability is among the best in the class. He is dominant. His vertical is impressive in game. He's overall a little bit faster than he is quick, which is a little bit of a weird profile, to be honest with you. But he's also relatively good after the catch. I will say now, the Triple Crown thing, we saw in film, what percentage of his routes were just quick outs that were completed over and over again against off coverage?
There was so much. There was so many out routes on film. So that's where the majority of his receptions come from for sure, where he would just catch a 5-yard out for like 8 or 9 yards and then go out of bounds. That was a lot of what we saw. It just kept working. But yeah, I thought, his jump ball ability was pretty impressive for sure. Definitely not a big time athlete in terms of speed or acceleration, but pretty physical. But the problem with that is he's from San Jose State, converted quarterback too, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, he's just gonna have to show that ability on an NFL field, and I think the level of competition is really going to hurt him a lot, and that's why he's down here in the D tier. So the next guy on our list is Kobe Hudson out of UCF, a guy that, kind of similar to Ricky White, just doesn't really do anything particularly great. Another one of these typical jump ball receivers. Unfortunately, at UCF, they didn't really throw a lot of, passes at all. They mainly relied on RJ Harvey, which I wouldn't blame you. But, so his passes weren't very great when they were thrown to him. But, he did make some really impressive catches for sure. He definitely didn't have great long speed. Him and Ricky White are very similar. The only reason why we have him above, because we thought the route running was just a little bit more consistent, a little more clean. The double moves especially, where he would fake a curl and burst up field. That was pretty impressive, and his release packages were pretty diverse as well. So that's why we have Kobe Hudson over Ricky White, but, they're very, very similar players.
Yeah, we comped him to Timu T. Higgins. I think at times he has flashes of tremendous ball skills and deep ball winning ability. He's just not the best athlete. There are worse athletes, but just a little bit raw with the route running and just a lot of upside, though, if he were to somehow be able to become a much better route runner. But yeah, Timu T. Higgins.
Yep, I see that 100%. Next guy, this is going to be a little bit of outrage for sure. At the bottom of our C tier, we have Jayden Higgins, wide receiver out of Iowa State.
Yeah, so with Jayden Higgins, I understand that he was a combine warrior. I will say the 4.47, I believe it was, speed that he ran on the combine, I don't think that translates. We watched multiple games of all 22. He just is not that fast on the field. I know everybody's saying this guy is Nico Collins. I really don't think that is the peak top most unlikely outcome that is theoretically possible. Just understand how unlikely that is. I will say his hands are probably arguably the best in the class. He doesn't drop anything. In contested catch situations, he is going to dominate you at the catch point. I understand if you look at some highlights, you'll say, oh, he burned this guy deep. It really is not consistent. A lot of times with these boundary receivers, the hit rate on these, specifically for fantasy, is not very good. And a lot of times, if you think about all the good wide receivers in the NFL right now, right? You have Nico Collins, it's a boundary receiver, but he has CJ Stroud. Before CJ Stroud, he wasn't delivering anything. Then you have players like DK Metcalf. Well, DK Metcalf is a superhuman athlete. I don't think that's very fair to compare the two of them. Then you have players like A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is just a dominant force. I think that with Jayden Higgins, people are really going to love the measurables. And I definitely think that if he were to land in a perfect situation with a very good quarterback and a lack of competition in the wide receiver room, that he does have some upside. Just to understand that with these boundary wide receivers, quarterback play is so important. And historically, the hit rate on them is way worse than versatile or slot-only wide receivers. So if he doesn't hit, understand that there is a big reason historically why these profiles are just ones to avoid, especially considering you're probably going to have to take him quite high in your rookie drafts due to the hype. At a value, I definitely would have no problem hitting or drafting him. And I wish him the absolute best. Just understand that historically, this is a bad profile to bet on.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at literally every single skill position player drafted since 2015 or 2014, and it's not even close. These vertical X receivers, like your Kobe Hudsons, your Ricky Whites, Jayden Higgins, those types of receivers, they're just not very productive. Jayden Higgins, I know the combine looks good, but just on film, he doesn't really show that super freakness. I liked his short route running for sure. Like, I think he's got some cool little tricks up his sleeve in terms of his route running. But, and he's got phenomenal hands.
I just want to add one thing. If he ends up hitting, just understand that that is bad process. Anything is possible for any of these wide receivers. Just understand the data says that these profiles are the least likely to hit, along with the least amount of upside in fantasy.
All right, so moving on to our next guy. We got Torrey Horton out of Colorado State. So a guy that really showed up at the combine as well, especially coming off of a knee injury, a pretty bad knee injury as well. I think it was a ligament tear in his knee. Ran a 4.41, I believe, coming off of that knee injury. So in all reality, he's probably a mid to high 4.3s runner. And he's 6'2", 6'3", 185, 195 pounds. There's not a lot of film on this guy, but we found, as much as we could on him. He is very good in open space. We saw, if you watch the Colorado game, you can't really get a super accurate representation of his skill set because he was just running shallow cross, over and over and over again. But that does give you a sense of like his speed after the catch. And there was a few plays where he was just making people miss in a phone booth. He's really shifty, has some really good ball skills as well. There's some things like, his deep routes, his releases, he's just going to run and, try to get open, right? He's not necessarily a great separator, but I do think his speed's pretty solid. And, he's going to be one of those later round guys. So, and he's, that prototypical X type of receiver. I think he's got a little bit more versatility than these other guys do, but, he's going to be a primary X or a Z for us.
Yep, he is a drag route merchant. At least that's how he was used. I will say, when I say that, understand that just because somebody was, asked to do something or not asked to do something at the collegiate level doesn't mean that they're incapable of doing it. A prime example, Brian Thomas. He was the deep threat guy, the boundary receiver that was used to create production for Neighbors. And then at the NFL level, he cleaned up some of his route running, and he was a 3-level threat and a dominant force as a rookie. Now, I don't think that that is what Horton ends up being. But once again, just because he was asked to run drag routes exclusively doesn't mean he's incapable of doing more.
Yeah, and I do think, we did see some pretty impressive catches. That one super highlight one on the sideline where, he came back to the ball and had to, extend himself way out of bounds to catch this pass one-handed was, super impressive. So, yeah, he's definitely got some really good ball skills. I just don't know where he's utilized, right? Next up, we got the second Iowa State receiver, Jaylen Noel. I know people are probably going to be angry about Noel being higher than Higgins, but, that's just what we saw in the film.
Yeah, it's what we saw in the film, and it's just with this grading scale. So some things are going to, such as being an incredible athlete is going to give you a little bit of a boost here, but understand that a lot of times the super athletes, obviously they have to have some technical skill as well, do present us with the most maximum upside in fantasy. So I think that being an elite athlete, and I think that Noel isn't necessarily elite, but I do think that he is overall a better athlete, maybe not size adjusted, but nonetheless, he's very, very fast. He ran in the 4.3s during the 40, and that does translate on the NFL or on the collegiate field and will translate on the NFL field as well. I think his releases are above average as well. I think he can run routes on all 3 levels of the field, but I think he's going to be more so slot dependent. He's just not the biggest guy overall. But I will say that with the ball in his hands, he is a little bit above average. Definitely has some wiggle, and I do think that he has the chance, despite his lack of overall production in college. I do think he has a chance if he goes into an offense that features the slot wide receiver extensively. Definitely think that he could have some big blow up type games. And as far as a player comp, I think he's a little bit worse than Jalen Waddle, but I think that's a similar prototype of wide receiver.
Actually ran faster than Jaden Waddle at the 40 on the 40 time. I know he got hurt at Bama a little bit, and that definitely slowed his 40 time. But I do think on the field, Waddle's faster than Noel. But, Noel can definitely be that slot receiver that separates. Definitely saw separation all of the time on film. The routes weren't necessarily super crisp, but I think he's an avid route runner at all three stages of the field for sure. So, yeah, we definitely are pretty high on him compared to other people, right? Next up, we have Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver out of Miami. Consensus has him a little bit higher than we do. A lot of people sleeper in the draft, right? He's just another one of those guys. I think he's going to be slot dependent at the next level, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely limits your usage at the NFL level, right? If you can play Z, maybe a little bit of X, but primarily play slot and Z, you'll be on the field a lot more and give you more opportunities to produce numbers, right? With Restrepo, I thought he was a pretty solid route runner, right? I didn't think he did anything bad there. His releases and double moves were pretty crisp, constantly getting separation, right? Having Cam Ward kind of helps you a little bit there, but just in terms of his speed, though, wasn't really blown away with his speed. There's probably a reason why he didn't run. Probably wasn't going to run really well, but just there's a lot of things, especially with his agility. On film, you'll see him try these, agility moves a lot. It just didn't really work, really. It's not that he did them wrong necessarily. He just doesn't have that explosiveness as an athlete to really make these moves work. But as far as a player, though, he's one of the grimiest dog players. Like, he's just, however he needs to make it happen, he's going to make it happen. And that's something that I really respect about his game. He's going to find a way to try to get open as best as he can. He doesn't use his athleticism to purely get open. He's trying to do every trick in the book, right? And I think he'll get on an NFL roster because of that. And, he's just a super hard worker too. So, yeah, I think he'll end up on a roster specifically because of that.
He's just more so solid at everything, but not particularly dominant in any one thing. Like you said, the moves just I don't think are really going to translate after the catch. It's not for a lack of effort. It's just he's just not that dude as an athlete.
Yeah, for sure. All right, up next is Illinois' Pat Bryant.
Yeah, so with Pat Bryant, I was quite surprised by his 40 time. It was very, very slow. But I will say on the field, I think that he looks faster than his 40 time suggests, which is quite interesting. And I say that because he, for being a taller wide receiver, he's 6'2", and I believe he's over 200 pounds, if I remember correctly. He is a dominant player at the contested catch point. He makes some ridiculous catches in traffic. He separates relatively well on some of those slant routes through physicality more so than just, separation the traditional way through, quick movements. But I will say that after the catch, here's the thing about him, right? Off the line of scrimmage, his burst really isn't that incredible. But once he gets the ball in his hands, he accelerates incredibly quickly. And he is one of the better yards after catch guys in the class. Seriously, throw in some highlights. You will see him flip the field, maximize yardage, use his blockers effectively, throw people to the ground, truck people, juke people, spin. It's incredible. I think he is one of the bigger sleepers in this class. And it just depends on where he's used at the NFL level. I definitely think that he could be in the slot for sure as a big slot if, a team would want to do that with him. And I definitely think that he has the ability to be an X. He will have to work more against press coverage. He didn't really face it as much. But if his ability to throw people on the ground and truck people and force them to get out of his way is any indication of his ability to fight off handsy coverage at the line of scrimmage, I think that there is some serious upside with this guy.
Yeah, and with him, he doesn't, like you said, he doesn't have that initial burst off the line, but after 10, 15 yards or so, he just starts getting super fast. is like you had first pointed it out, like, probably 10 plays into our all 22 watch. And then every single time we were like, wow, this dude's really fast. She's just not a quick starter, right? And like you said, the physicality, I mean, he might be one of the most physical guys. There's a couple guys on here that might be a little more physical than him, but this is somebody that we graded way later on, and we were very surprised. I mean, he's, right here in the dead middle of our tier list, right? So definitely somebody we're super surprised by. So up next, we have Ty Felton out of Maryland, a guy that we also graded relatively late. He definitely has some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows for us on film. Specifically, his separation off the line. He's got great bursts off the line, just immediately separating on these slants and things like that, especially, the short routes. But release packages as well, he utilizes those as well. He's not really the deepest bag. I do remember some outside releases where he would just explode off the line, and then, the corner's just doomed from the start. Now, moving on to his run after catch ability, once he goes and gets that ball, he is really hard to get your hands on because of his elusiveness and his ability to just make people miss after the catch. Things that aren't necessarily great with him is the catch point is something that's not going to be good. He's not going to be able to catch these contested balls very much. And then, he had some concentration drops, more than you'd like to see on film for sure. So, there's that. There's just, a lot of question marks with him. And if you start dropping passes at the NFL level, boom, you're off to the practice squad in no time. So I do think his ability after the catch and his ability to separate immediately will get him a roster spot, though. He's just got to clean up those drops for sure.
Yeah, so in terms of the short area of the field, he's dynamic on those shallow crosses and those slants. He runs a good dig route and gets a ton of separation. Now, I think he's more of a 2-level route runner than 3-level, because when he gets down the field, he can separate due to suddenness on posts and corners. But in terms of just stacking deep on these go routes, while yes, he ran a fast 40 time, he's more so quick than overtly fast, and so he just does not stack on those go routes downfield. So I do think that he has the potential, if he's used in the slot a lot, to put up some big numbers because he is dynamic after the catch.
Yeah. All right, so another guy that's relatively a sleeper in this class that, not a lot of people were talking about. It's Elic Ayomanor out of Stanford. I know a lot of people in Dynasty were looking at his freshman year where he went over 1,000 yards at Stanford. He kind of took a step back this year, but yeah, how do you feel about Elic Ayomanor?
Yeah, so Elic Ayomanor it's interesting. So he can be a little bit of a highlights type player that lacks the consistency at times. So in terms of his catch and traffic ability, overall it is quite poor. His contested catch rate, and on film we saw that at the catch point he just was not that impressive. But then you see some of these highlights, like that one-handed grab in traffic where he's spinning out towards the front corner of the end zone. It's ridiculous stuff. So there's high highs and low lows with him. Now, in terms of his speed, I will say it's inconsistent. At times, he bursts off the line of scrimmage and gets instant separation vertically. And then other times, it's just not the same. So I don't know if it's just a lack of down-to-down effort. Somebody like Garrett Wilson comes to mind where, at times when he wants to be, he is the most dominant player, but just on a route-to-route basis, it just doesn't come through all the time. But overall, I do think that he had an impressive combine showing, which could potentially raise his draft stock. And I do think that he could be a decent volume receiver if he can work on his catch and traffic ability.
Yeah, the route running for Elic was definitely super impressive for me. I thought he was one of the better route runners in the class, in that 5 to 8 range for me in terms of just overall route running. But, like you said, I will say his production as a freshman was super great. And, he did take a step back. I think he only had 800 yards this year. But when I was watching all 22 for Elic, I mean, all we saw was QB run, QB run, QB run, QB run over and over and over and over and over again. So the offense definitely wasn't suited to his strengths, right? They did not give him a lot of volume. I would have liked Elick. He is coming out as a sophomore, so he's only had 2 years of experience. I would have loved to see him maybe transfer to like a Ole Miss or one of these higher pass volume teams, just so he could have had a really good year for his junior season and then come out. He might have even been a first round pick even. So now we're moving on to our top 10. So we're going to be kind of going more in depth with some of these receivers now. So at our number 10 spot, we have Trey Harris. So Trey Harris out of Ole Miss is somebody that was generating a lot of first round hype for sure. Even some early second round talks as well. This is the guy that I might have been the most disappointed in as far as overall just hype compared to what I saw on film. Just as far as speed's concerned, I didn't really see great speed on film. I thought he was going to be in that 4.55 range. I don't know exactly what he ran at the combine, but and then we saw a lot of hitches. I mean, tons of hitches. He reminds me of just slow DK Metcalf, in my opinion. That's what I see a lot of. Now, in terms of at the catch point, pretty impressive stuff. He's pretty physical. And his actual production this season, if you look at it, he was putting up some of the best production per game of any receiver in the country this year. So that kind of skews people's opinions on him. I just think the Ole Miss offense was very gimmicky, and I just don't necessarily see a lot of high-end traits with Trey Harris outside of his catching traffic and catching ability overall. I thought the route running was decent, especially deep down the field where he didn't really get separation but was able to catch it anyways just because of his freak ability at the catch point. And obviously the hitches he ran pretty well as well, but and slants as well he ran relatively well. But outside of that, I just didn't see a lot. Plus he's that vertical X linear type of receiver that we just don't see a lot of hits on that.
Yeah, the highs are going to be incredibly high. It's just, once again, like we keep mentioning, these profiles of these vertical X's, they are so dependent on quarterback play. So if he has a crappy quarterback, he's trying to catch passes deep down the field. Understand that the production is few and far between because it's so much harder to complete those types of passes. So while, yes, he's going to have those games where he does have a couple catches for, maybe 80 to 100 yards and a touchdown, it's just way more challenging to catch those than it is these little easy gimme routes that some of these slot receivers are going to catch, which is all we care about for fantasy is total production, right? And so the one funny thing is if you look at his yards per out run, it's in the fives, which is the best I've seen in, I can't even remember how long. That might be the best in some time. I just think that people that are just purely analytical people are going to be way higher on him than I think we should be because we've once again gone through this data, and this profile of wide receiver is just the worst bet. And if you end up hitting on one of these, congratulations. It's just understand that that is bad process because the chances that you hit on these and the maximum upside is just so much lower than a lot of these other profiles.
Yeah, and again, he's going to be a super frustrating asset to have in fantasy where, he's going to be kind of like maybe like a Mike Williams, somebody like that, where, he's going to catch a big, long touchdown randomly. He'll have like 2 or 3 catches per game, and maybe one of them goes for a touchdown. Think of like Christian Watson, for example, somebody like that. I think Christian Watson's a way better athlete than Trey Harris, but, kind of that type of profile. I'm out on it for sure. I don't want to do that. I've went through the Christian Watson experience enough. Moving on to our number 9 receiver, we have Kyle Williams, a guy that you're super high on. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about Kyle Williams.
With Kyle Williams, he is more so fast than he is quick, but he is still very quick. Now, in terms of his on-field speed, it is remarkable. He has this outside release that if you're not aware of what's going on, or if you're trying to jam him and you miss, you are cooked. Understand that there is no chance for you.
Yep.
Teams are going to have to respect him on the outside. But then he also has a nifty diamond release. There was this one rep where he was on the left side of the screen and he was running a slant. He ran a diamond release. He had probably 3 yards of separation, and the cornerback was turned the complete wrong way. There is so much upside with this guy. Now, why is he down here? The catch point. He has these plays where he makes remarkable catches in traffic, but overall, and it's actually funny because in contested catch situations, he's better than he is just generally catching, and it's because of frustrating focus drops. I believe he had at least 5 this past season, but that's really what the issue is. I know he's rising up a lot of people's boards because he had an impressive combine, which to us was no surprise. And even on these run plays, right? On film, on these run plays, these cornerbacks were so scared of him. And he was running these outside releases on the runs where 3 seconds into the play, the cornerback had no idea that it was a run. That's how scared they were of getting toasted. So there is a lot of upside with him, but he definitely needs to work at the catch point, and he is dynamic after the catch. My comp for him is a less productive Garrett Wilson. He's definitely a lot more raw than Garrett Wilson is, especially at the catch point. But that is a stylistic comp, and if he ends up hitting, there is a good amount of upside with this guy.
Yeah, and like you said, he has some of the deepest releases, like some of the deepest bags, the deepest bag of releases in the class, in my opinion. It is insane. I mean, he's just doing all this really creative stuff, and mix that with him being a great athlete as well. I mean, these corners, we found ourselves laughing time and time again on film because these poor corners were like, oh my goodness, he's running. And like, it completely takes the corner out of the play. So like the running back just has a free running lane from time to time. And these corners are just running for their life because Kyle Williams has got like 4 yards of separation on him. So yeah, I mean, he's a menace, man. He is a menace. He's probably the biggest sleeper for us in the draft in terms of just overall where he's going to be drafted in that 4 to 5, 4th to 5th round range. I mean, I really have a hard time not seeing him be a impact on a team for sure. All right, moving on to the next guy. At the top of our C tier, we have Matthew Golden, who's I know going to be higher on a lot of people's lists than we have him. So Matthew Golden, I know if you watched the Combine, you saw him tear up the Combine, which I was a little surprised of, honestly. I didn't really see the speed on film that much. I definitely thought it was solid, like pretty solid, like, in the 4.3s, high 4.3s. I didn't expect him to run a 4.29, but he did. He's just, if you just look at highlights for him, even if you look at the highlights, you'll see a lot of these touchdowns that he had came on busted coverage. And, I will say props to Golden and Isaiah Bond for putting up with Quinn Ewers this year. I know that must have been tough, but, the production just wasn't really there for me. And just, I didn't really see a lot of really high-end things either. Like, the route running was fine. Nothing really particularly twitchy or sudden for me. The releases were okay. He was getting separation from time to time, but I just didn't see any elite traits outside of he's very reliable at the catch point. He's good at catching in traffic. But outside of that, I just didn't really see. I didn't think he was super great after the catch. I thought he was good with that speed. He can mix elusiveness with that speed from time to time. But I don't think he's like an elite after the catch guy, like some guy like Luther Burden or, some other guys that we'll talk about later on down the list. But, I do think he's very versatile. I think regardless of how I think of him, I think he will be on a team being productive at the next level. I don't know how much production, but he will have some production because he can line up anywhere on the field. So that is definitely a positive for him. But yeah, I just didn't see any elite traits with him.
Yeah, I will say one thing I do like about him is he should have a good bit of positional versatility. I think that he could theoretically be lined up anywhere on the field. Um, Now, I will say the one thing that I think we also need to mention is when he gets the ball in open space, doesn't he remind you of Terry McLaurin, where he just jets?
Yep.
And there is the potential for him to take the top off a defense at times. Obviously, we know that his 40 was fast. I will say, like you said, I don't think it's quite as fast in game, but you definitely need to respect his game. I think this guy could be a very dangerous vertical threat. I just think he really needs to clean up some of his route running, and it just sucks for this guy that he had to deal with Quinn Ewers, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of another guy that really, had to deal with Quinn Ewers, Isaiah Bond, another Texas guy back to back.
Yeah, so with Isaiah Bond, his route running was quite impressive. In terms of separation on the speed outs, I think maybe Tez Johnson is the only guy that could do it reasonably close to him, and I think his is better than Tez's. As far as the post routes downfield, tons of separation. Now, unfortunately, not only did this man have to deal with Quinn Ewers, he also had to deal with
Jalen Milrow.
yes, sir. And so this guy has never once in his life, probably since high school, had, you know, standard level quarterback play. Now, I will say it was definitely disappointing that he said he was going to break the combine record for 40 time, and then he was even slower than projected, 4.41. On the field, his speed is so much faster than what I saw from him at the combine. I'm not sure what happened, but especially his acceleration, he is like a Ferrari. He can instantly after the catch go boom and get a ton of separation. Now I will say his catch in traffic is not going to be one of his best strong suits, rather. But once again, he's so fast and it creates so much separation that I really just don't think that he's going to find himself in these contested catch situations for it to matter as much. And like with some of these other guys at the catch point, if they just don't have the separation ability and the dangerous speed that makes defenses respect them, it's almost impossible, in my opinion, that they work out. But with this guy, if he can just get a little bit better at the catch point, he can turn into a very dangerous receiver. And I think that his max upside, which is quite unlikely, is somewhere in between Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill if everything clicks for this guy.
Yeah, mainly it's just cleaning up some of the drops, right? He had some drops throughout his career, but, showed up in big moments, at least at Alabama, right? But, I mean, you just see all of the missed opportunities, whether it's a drop or an overthrow from either Milrow or Ewers, both have very inconsistent deep accuracies, in our opinion. But, outside of that, right, all of these missed touchdowns that he could have had, I know people are kind of, bashing him because he's only had 100-yard game or more in his entire collegiate career. I think that's just because, he hasn't been reliably been getting hit on these deep plays. Obviously, we saw maybe 9, maybe 10 touchdowns on film where he just got overthrown. If half of those don't get overthrown, we're looking at a guy that's got multiple 1,000-yard seasons, in my opinion. And another thing that I really want to reiterate here that you said, the speed out with him is so unfair. Even at the NFL level, he's going to be nuts if he gets to run that consistently. It's so hard to avoid. It's so hard to cover.
Imagine if he had played where Nick Nash did and had been in that role.
2,000 yards for sure. All right, moving on to the next guy on our list. Some guy that I'm really high on, even though he's going to this nightmare school for receivers, TCU. It's Jack Bech out of TCU. There's a lot of things to like about this guy. He's definitely one of the guys, like, if you're not familiar with Jack Bech's game, you definitely need to go out and watch. Probably top 2, top 3 route runner in the class in terms of just suddenness, getting separation consistently. Even though he's not the fastest guy, I know he didn't run, unfortunately. I wish he did. I think he's in that high 4.4s, maybe low 4.5s. He's not super fast, but I think he's a avid enough athlete to where he's going to be decent enough at the NFL level. That's not why I like this guy. I like him because great releases, some of the best in the class at just getting separation. He's just so good at separating. Just it's insane how good he is at separating. And then when he doesn't separate, he's got this really great ability to just get physical and get big and catch the ball in traffic. I didn't see barely any drops on film. Um, you know, Pretty much top of the class in terms of catching, getting physical, getting contested catches down. I just feel like he's going to be exceptional at the next level at a vertical X position or a Z position. You can put him in the slot as well. He's a converted tight end as well. So, if you want to bring him in line from time to time, I think he's got a ton of versatility there. He's just not great after the catch, really. A lot of these catches are just him jumping up. He's kind of like a possession guy, kind of like T. Higgins in a way. But my comp for him is more like a Puka Nakua for me. A guy that's not super athletic, right? But is able to make all the catches when he needs to. Physical guy after the catch as well. So, yeah, that's kind of my comp for him. I definitely can see that upside for sure.
Guys, please don't helmet scout. This guy, Jack Bech, is not like these other TCU receivers. He is not Quentin Johnston. He's not a body catcher that plays like he's 5'6". Now, a landing spot that I think could be incredibly dangerous. You mentioned his comp is Puka Nakua. If he goes to the Rams, this guy could put up some ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And as far as after the catch, he has above average, in my opinion, agility and change of direction. But his deceleration is crazy. There was this one rep, if you remember, where he was running and after the catch, and he just stopped on a dime and then cut underneath the tackler. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So once again, please don't helmet scout.
Yeah, and obviously, I will say with Savion Williams, the other TCU guy that's on our list, right? He definitely has all of those TCU traits that you want to be like, oh no, he's bad. Look, Savion Williams can be absolutely the biggest bust in the class if he gets picked in the third or fourth round, just because he can't catch a football right now. He can clean up that, cool. Bech doesn't show me any sort of issue in terms of just catching traffic. He's very reliable there. All right, moving on to the next guy on our list, we have Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. He's getting some first round draft buzz, probably even early second is where I think he'll land, early to mid second. But he has been getting some first round buzz as well.
Yeah, so with Emeka Egbuka, his releases are some of there are receivers that have better releases, but his releases are very impressive, especially against off coverage. I liken him to a JSN type of player, maybe Chris Olave, because his route running is superb. The out routes, the hitches, especially the deep crossers down the field, his dig routes, all are incredibly impressive. And these are NFL routes that he is going to be asked to run. Now, I don't think he's going to be able to necessarily be the best against physical press man coverage, so I don't know if the X is for him, which, hey, in terms of for fantasy, that's not even a bad thing, to be honest with you. We would prefer, absolute positional versatility, obviously, but I think he's more of a slot guy or potentially a Z, and that is not a bad thing for fantasy production, so don't take that as a negative. Now, in terms of speed and yards after catchability, I think he's much more like Chris Olave than JSN, but I think he runs his routes like JSN. So I think before the catch, JSN, after the catch, Olave, he's just not really going to get much more than just what's in a straight line ahead of him. And he just doesn't have this burner speed. I think there's a reason he didn't run at the combine. But I will say he is a relatively fast accelerator. He has incredible ball skills. Uh, really, the catch point is not an issue with him. He's a great route runner. He separates easily. He is going to be very, very good for us in fantasy. I just don't think he necessarily has. Um, I think he's more of a wide receiver two that is solid consistently than one of these explosive wide receiver one types. And I think the lack of yak ability is going to be the biggest reason.
Yeah, so you said JSN. I definitely see JSN. I see a little Cooper Cup in him as well. Just a really quick, uh, savvy route runner when it comes to these shorter routes as well. I mean, he's getting open all over the field for me. I think he'll be more of a slot guy. He could play a little bit of Z, but primarily slot. He'll probably be 60-70% slot, I'd have to say. So yeah, for sure. I think he can be very productive at the next level, but he's not going to be like your prototypical number one receiver. So up next is one of my favorite wide receivers. A lot of people are down on him right now because of the bad combine, or at least the bad 40 time. He didn't necessarily have a bad combine, just a bad 40 time. It's Tez Johnson out of Oregon. So a lot of things I want to say about Tez Johnson. First, I don't think the 40 time to me has any indication on him as a player. I will say I don't know what happened in terms of the 40 time. I think it was a 4.52 or something like that. I think he's genuinely much, much faster than that. And you see that all over the film. We gave him a really good speed score in our model. In terms of his short routes, the out routes, like we said, very similar to Isaiah Bond, right? Hitches, things like that, screens. He's one of the best screen receivers in the entire country. So he's got that in his back pocket for sure. And just so quick. I mean, he's such a quick accelerator. Very good after the catch. I mean, some of the best agility in the class, right? And he's super small, though. He's 5'10", 156 pounds is what I think he weighed in at the combine, which is, if I have my numbers right, the lightest receiver since I think 2003 to be drafted into the NFL, which I don't know the other receiver's name. So, I don't know if that's necessarily a great sign. But I will say Tez Johnson on film is an absolute monster after the catch specifically. In terms of his catch in traffic, his, contested catchability, that's not his game. That's not going to be his game. Don't throw him contested catches. He had more than I would have liked him to have, but his contested catch percentage is not very good. But I do think, all in all, his catching is very reliable. But outside of that, his route running's really good, and his yak ability is really good. But his versatility, though, I think he is only a slot. I don't think he plays Z. I think he's too small to play Z, and they're going to have to use him in some creative way in terms of how they use Xavier Worthy in Kansas City. You're going to need to keep press coverage away from him because we've seen him get bullied in press coverage because he is so small. But if this guy can get into open space, he's super dynamic.
Yeah, I think if he's put in bunch formations with switch releases or put in motion, I think that is the best way to use him because if he gets ahead of steam coming off the line of scrimmage and you can't press him, you are cooked. Uh, he is one of the best yards after catch guys in the class in terms of pure elusiveness, stop start ability, juke ability. There are some players who I prefer after the catch only in that they are more physical. But once again, this guy is 150 pounds. He's just not going to be breaking tackles with physicality. But I will say he is dynamic. I know people, like you said, are just down on him because of that combine. Understand that on the field, besides watching the All 22 like we did, just watch some highlights, man. This guy is ridiculous after the catch. He is going to be drafted, and man, depending on the landing spot, he is more landing spot dependent, sure. If he gets put in a place where they use bunch formations, switch releases, he's put in movement, understand that this guy is going to be ridiculous at the NFL level after the catch.
Yeah, and at the very least, he'll be a return man. He definitely has that ability to be an elite, electric return man. So disregard his 40 time. Cordero Patterson didn't really have that great of a 40 time either, and he's one of the best return men ever. So uh, just kind of keep that. He's probably going to be a great return man. So next up, we have one of your favorite guys, if not your favorite rookie in the entire class. We got Jaylen Royals, wide receiver out of Utah State.
Yeah, so this guy I am way higher on than consensus. Um, Understand that he just has almost every trait that you look for in an elite fantasy asset at receiver. He is 6 foot, 205 pounds at the combine. So that is right around your Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors' height and weight. Check. Now, some people were giving him terrible speed grades and saying he's slow on film. I could not disagree more. And while once again, the Underwear Olympics are definitely not representative of per se on field speed, he ran a 4.41 coming off a foot injury. This guy is really fast. But more importantly, once again, also the combine, his 10-yard split was tied for the best in the class. So remember, his burst is also ridiculous. Now, who does he remind me of and why? I think as a low end comp, I think that Jaden Reed is a great comparison here. So on his hitches, for instance, his snap down is ridiculous. It reminds me a lot of Malik Neighbors, and he has this same ability as Malik Neighbors to spin and juke somebody out and instantly get upfield. He breaks tackles consistently. He has a nasty juke move in the open field and great spatial awareness in the open field. Now, he also reminds me a little bit of Jamar Chase. You'll notice on some of these tunnel screens and plays like that, where he has great vision in terms of utilizing his blockers, their leverage to his advantage. He has crazy burst. Uh, just look at his highlights, not even just his film. His releases are pretty good. But I would say more so the route that worries me the most is the dig. He does have some wasted movement, which is going to have to be cleaned up. But I think that he has the ability to burn people deep, and we did see that on film as well. But why isn't he Jamar Chase or Malik Neighbors? Catch point. He just gets bumped off his route. He just, for whatever reason, despite being incredibly physical, and similar to DJ Moore even after the catch, whatever reason, at the catch point, he does get bumped. He has concentration drops a lot more than I would like. And I think the catch point is really the only thing preventing this guy from being a very dangerous receiver. Nonetheless, I am incredibly high on this guy. And just understand that he has so many similar traits to some of these elite wide receivers. Because if you think about all the elite receivers at the NFL level, right? What do they almost all have in common? They're almost always, at the very least, good after the catch, but most of them are great. And so that's why some of these players that we're looking at here, and especially near the top, they are incredible after the catch, and that is almost a prerequisite to being an elite fantasy asset.
Yeah, I will say after the catch, every person after this we gave a 5 out of 5 score. With Jaylen Royals especially, I think yeah, his catching, he has some concentration drops here and there, and, his catch point's a little iffy from time to time. There's all these spectacular traits that pop off, and I think he could be a one at the next level. He just has to clean up a few things. And at worst, like you said, he's going to be like a Jaden Reed type of player where he's going to get you, 800 yards, 900 yards, 8, 9 touchdowns at the very least. So I think the floor for him is very, very safe. Up next, we have another guy that we think pretty sure going to go in the first round, Luther Burden out of Mizzou. There's a lot of yellows here, and that is due to us not really showing you guys what he's the best at. Now, in terms of his actual route running, it's fine. His short and deep routes are definitely, pretty solid. His medium routes, I think he relies solely on athleticism for a lot of his play style, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in terms of him being a raw player, that's kind of what he is. He's kind of like that Debo Samuel type where he's not like doing everything correct in terms of just technique. He's just so big and so physical that he just kind of goes through his routes, doesn't do all of these, avid little techniques that, other receivers do. But he still gets open because he's a physical freak, right? And that's kind of how Luther Burden is. His releases aren't necessarily great. We didn't think his speed on the field was necessarily great, but his 40 time was definitely impressive. We did not expect him to run that fast at all. So that is good. We just didn't see that on film that much. But in terms of his acceleration, though, super quick accelerator. And once he gets the ball in his hand, he is probably the hardest person to bring down in open space. And I don't think it's close at all. I mean, he is the best after the catch in this class, I think. And, Royals and maybe Tez are the only guys that can come close to him. I mean, that's where he really shines. So, he kind of reminds me a lot of kind of like a Malik Neighbors, where he's just, you're not tackling me, I'm going to throw you off of me, or I'm going to juke you out of your shoes, or I'm going to spin you out of your cleats. It doesn't matter. He's going to be great after the catch. I will say his production in 2023 was much better than it was this year, but Missouri's offense was awful this year, and they used him as like this weird gadget player. Use him as your one and just, he may be slot specific, but still use him as your one, kind of like how they use like Cooper Kupp in a way and with the Rams in 2021. He is a guy that you want to get the ball as much as possible. 12 targets, 13 targets a game, whatever it takes. He's going to make plays, and, those, the speed, catching, things like that, like, it's fine. But in terms of his actually that yellow bar should be green. I think we made an error there, but that's fine.
Yeah, with Luther Burden, I think especially with the Neighbors comp, he runs one of the best slot fades that I've seen. The only guy I can think of that runs a better slot fade is Malik Neighbors. He positions his body perfectly. He has that Ferrari-like acceleration. After the catch, I will say I don't think he's quite as dynamic in terms of the agility as Neighbors, but I think he's almost there. But I think he's more powerful. In terms of tackling this guy, good luck with that. I don't know what you do, honestly. This guy is going to be an absolute menace. And if he goes to an offense that has any idea how to get their playmakers in space, this guy is going to dominate, especially for fantasy. He should get the draft capital. Like you were saying, the 40 time at the combine surprised us because it doesn't look quite that good on tape. But people are for whatever reason, it seemed as though his draft stock to public opinion is going down after the combine, which makes no sense. He looked great. And yeah, like you said, he needs to be targeted at a high clip. He is going to constantly maximize yardage. Good luck tackling this guy. And this guy, I think, is going to be a star at the NFL level.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you notice there's not a single S-tier receiver. We get our number one receiver. I'll go over him in just a second. But, yeah, obviously last year we had multiple S-tier receivers, like Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze and those guys, right? Obviously, that receiving class was very, very great. Compared to this class, you see a whole bunch of people in the C tier, right? We just see a lot of, average to below average receivers in this class, and we don't see an actual, elite talent here. But I will move on to Tez here. I do think he is, slightly better than Luther Burden, in my opinion, when it comes to just pure receiving. Now, obviously, the speed's nothing crazy. I think he is one of the slower receivers in the class outside of Ja'Cory Brooks and a few others. But that's very surprising that he scores this good in the model because he's got great route running, especially in the short area of the field, and he is great after the catch. As this big 6'5" frame, he's so good at breaking off tackles and juking people out of their shoes and just being able to maximize yardage at each rep. Right, it's just really impressive to me. Releases out of this world. He's more quick than he is fast. He's a great accelerator, but when it comes to, like I said, he's more quick than he is fast. And once he gets the ball in his hands, he's able to just make things happen. And at his size, it's very rare to see that. And obviously, with that 6'5" frame comes great catch radius, which he uses to his advantage all throughout his film. He's got great contested catch ability. He's got great catching ability. Just at the catch point, this guy is absolutely phenomenal. And then he's a great yak guy as well. Versatility wise, no problems with him being an X. That's probably what he's going to be, but he can be a Z. He can play the slot. He did it all at Arizona. I think he's going to go to either the Raiders, the Jaguars, somewhere in there, somewhere in that 6 to 15 range, I think, at the NFL draft. I've seen him go lower than that, but I think he's going to be a top 15 pick, and all of those teams really need a number one outside of the Jaguars, like, the Patriots, the Raiders, both of those teams are really desperate for a number one receiver, and he goes to one of those teams, he's going to be a really productive guy regardless. But if he goes to one of those two teams, he's going to be very productive next year or this year.
Yeah, so I will say, for somebody that's his size, he's a relatively good accelerator. He isn't necessarily the best in terms of his long speed. Now, I know he's been compared to Mike Evans a lot. Mike Evans is just a different animal, in my opinion, in terms of at the catch point, in terms of high pointing things. But McMillan is just so much more dynamic after the catch. I really don't think that's a good player comp, although I see it quite a bit. Another one I see is a more dynamic after the catch Drake London and a more athletic Drake London. Drake London before the catch is an incredibly athletic player, whereas McMillan, I think, is more athletic after the catch. So I really think that necessarily isn't the greatest player comp ever. I actually comped him to Brandon Marshall, somebody that is ridiculous at the catch point, but is a surprisingly good mover for somebody his size. This guy is going to dominate. I think he's more going to be best used in the slot specifically, but I think he does have true positional versatility. I will say the one thing is on these deep go routes, he just does not stack, and he wasn't able to stack against collegiate competition. I just don't think that's what he's going to be asked to do. But I do think things like posts and corners and routes like those, even deep down the field, your crossers, I do think he's going to be able to gain separation. And like you said, this guy is going to be an absolute monster. He needs to be fed. And I think the worst landing spot for him specifically is Jacksonville, just because they have Brian Thomas. But I think that this guy should be your team's number one wide receiver, and I would be shocked if this guy falls out of the top 15.
All right, well, that is our list. Obviously, we went over 26 receivers. I mean, we even got Ja'Cory Brooks in here somehow. There's going to be always, a guy that we miss maybe here or there. So, of course, if you guys notice any receivers that, like, I know Dante Thornton Jr. is a guy that definitely stood out at the combine. There's just, no film on that guy. He's so hard to get a player profile for. So, he's just one of the guys that we couldn't really get an accurate grade on. But if there's anybody else that you notice that, you'd like to see in the model, please comment them below, because, we're always interested to find more players and stuff to grade. So, yeah, if you have anybody that isn't on this list, feel free to comment them below.
Yeah, and just understand that we want all of these guys to succeed. With some of these guys, you'll notice that certain profiles, like we said, are lower than others. There is historical data to back this up. We put in a ton of information, different parameters, to be able to get the best idea of what is most important for each position, not even just wide receivers. We have the same information for running backs, tight ends, and to a degree quarterbacks, although there's just less athletic data with them. So just understand that we want all these guys to succeed. It's just some of these bets are better bets than others, and we have reasoning for which we want these guys uh, that have these common traits among them versus some that don't have these traits. All right, guys. So remember that these are pre NFL draft rankings. They are subject to change, especially once we know landing spot and more importantly, draft capital. Some of these guys, like we are a little bit lower on, like someone like, for instance, Jaden Higgins. If he goes to a spot with a great quarterback and not very much target competition, he could definitely rise up the ranks. Same thing with somebody like Golden. If he goes to a spot with a great quarterback play and weaker competition, there's definitely a chance that we are higher on him. So if we have some of these guys a little bit higher or lower after, just understand that landing spot is going to be important for some of these guys. And so, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the content today. We put a ton of effort into this, and shout out to Bobby for creating these slides.
Sweet. All right. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.